Hello, this presentation is from the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority, also called MPHA. MPHA owns and manages all of the public housing buildings in the city. We call this Pathways to Preservation. And for the next few minutes, we'll talk about our goal to preserve and improve our public housing. We'll also talk about the protections public housing residents will have during this process. This is MPHA's mission statement. The mission statement is the reason MPHA exists: to promote and deliver quality, well-managed homes to a diverse, low-income population, and, with partners, contribute to the well-being of the individuals, families, and community we serve. MPHA's only job is to provide homes for low-income people. The housing and well-being of residents is our mission, and that means doing whatever we can to preserve our affordable housing. So why is it so important to talk about preserving our housing? In the past, public housing repairs have been funded for the most part by the United States government. However, for many years, Congress has been decreasing the amount of money that it gives to MPHA and other public housing authorities. As you see here, MPHA currently receives around $10 million a year for major repairs and improvements, and that is not enough to keep up with our needs. We can't rely anymore only on the federal government. City and state governments can help, and you can help by reminding them of the importance of public housing. But we don't realistically believe the city and the state will have the money to solve our problem entirely. MPHA's buildings will need major work as they get older. Many of our high-rises are over 50 years old. Our family townhomes are 65 years old. We work hard to take care of all of our properties and to make sure that all of our units are comfortable and livable. We answer every work order as quickly as we can. But many of the biggest challenges are harder to see, things like plumbing, electricity, heating systems, and roofs. We have estimated the amount of work that needs to be done across all of our buildings. We have a total of about 6,000 public housing units. In 2017, our public housing would need $127 million to make all the improvements we believe we should make. But because we don't get enough money to keep up, each year this number is going to grow. Next year, it'll be $137 million. In 20 years, if we don't find new sources of money, it will be more than $500 million. Remember that the federal government gives us only around $10 million a year. So we plan to work hard in the coming years to save and improve homes for public housing residents. Whatever we do, it must fit our values. So we've written our promises in a document called Guiding Principles for Redevelopment and Capital Reinvestments at MPHA. The name is a little complicated, but the promises are simple. This slide shows some of the commitments in that document. For example, we promise that no resident will lose housing because of renovations or redevelopment. Your rent will not increase because of this process. MPHA will continue to manage the properties. If there are changes to your building at some point, you will have a guaranteed right to return when the work is finished. In many cases, you might be able to continue to live on the property even while that work is done. If a temporary move is necessary, families will always have choices to decide what is best for them. We promise to share information with residents often and talk with residents throughout the process. In fact, residents will help us design how the buildings can be improved. We currently have about 9,000 people in public housing, and our goal is to preserve housing for all of them. We will protect the many vulnerable populations we serve. These include the elderly, the disabled, and immigrants. The guiding principles are protections for residents. They do not contain a plan to do anything with your building or any other building. A plan would only come about after much research, thought, and discussion with residents. There are some ways we believe we can raise money to preserve our public housing. For example, we can borrow from a bank. We can also borrow another way by issuing bonds. In both cases, we receive money now and promise to pay it back over time with interest. The banks or those who buy bonds do not become owners or become involved in managing the properties. The challenge with borrowing from a bank or using bonds is that we need to be sure we have the money in the future to pay back the debt. We think that borrowing and bonding could play some role in meeting our goals, but they probably cannot be the entire solution. Here's a picture of another important option: low-income housing tax credits. And here's the basic way they work. An outside entity forms a partnership with MPHA to own the property with us for a limited period of time. Under current regulations, that's 15 years. The investor gets a break on its taxes. MPHA and public housing residents get lots of money in return from that investor to upgrade and improve the building. This is money that we do not have to pay back. If we did a tax credit deal, there's one very important thing to know. This will not mean the investor can do whatever he wants with the building. The investor cannot evict you. He cannot rent your unit to someone else. He can't raise your rent. He can't sell the building to someone else who would do these things. The investor spends money to fund major work on the building. The investor gets money back through the tax credit. But residents will not lose their housing because of a tax credit deal. We promise this to you. Now, this slide is going to get a little complicated, and that is because there are so many tools we plan to use to protect the rights of residents. MPHA would continue to own the land, which gives us ultimate control throughout any tax credit period. Residents are still protected by their lease, including the same grievance process that you're used to. MPHA would continue to manage the building with the same staff and policies you're used to. Binding legal documents will assure the property remains low-income housing for decades to come, and there are other examples here too. Housing authorities around the country have used tax credits successfully to preserve their housing. We know that it is possible to dramatically improve public housing while residents experience very little change. Here is one example from Cambridge, Massachusetts. This is where MPHA Executive Director Greg Russ worked before he moved to Minneapolis. And we believe it shows what is possible when residents and the housing authority work together. The Lincoln Way townhomes were built in 1950. There were 60 of them, and they were getting old. This is a picture of what they looked like a few years ago. The electrical, heat, and plumbing systems were not working very well. The bathrooms and kitchens required frequent repairs. You can see here that the townhomes were really not made for modern families. The Housing Authority met with residents frequently to learn what would be most important to them in their new homes. And the Housing Authority put together a combination of federal money, bonds, and tax credits. A tax credit investor, in fact, gave $14 million. That was more than 1/2 of the construction cost. And here is Lincoln Way today. It now has 70 units for very low-income families. That's 10 more than before. Many families lived on site during construction because construction proceeded in phases. Every one of the original 60 families had a right to return. And 44 of those families, almost 75% of them, did choose to continue to live at Lincoln Way. The others decided to stick with different options. You can see that the kitchens and bathrooms look pretty different than before. The new townhomes also had more bathrooms and private decks. The grounds were also redesigned. The streets were changed to make them easier to use, and new play areas were built. The heating, plumbing, and electrical systems are all new and much more reliable than before. These are a few more pictures of Lincoln Way and some residents at the reopening. There are also 2 quotes from residents, which I'll give you a moment to read for yourself. We wanted to show you Lincoln Way because it contains many of the great outcomes we believe we can accomplish by working together here in Minneapolis. Thank you for listening, and we hope this was helpful. If you live in public housing and you have questions, feel free to talk to your property manager. And anyone can email us with questions at contactmpha@mplspha.org.